Hi, I'm Randy Nelson. I'm the off-road technical trainer for Polaris Industries, and today we're going to install a Pro HD 3,500 pound winch with rapid rope technology in the Sportsman 570. Before we begin, we want to make sure we read the directions and check to be sure all parts and tools are accounted for. We want to make sure to retain these instructions for future references and parts order and information. Let's go ahead and begin with the install. Before we begin the installation process on the winch, we want to ensure that the vehicle is in the park position, the ignition key is off and removed from the vehicle. So we're going to go ahead and latch the front rack here. So there's just rubber latches on either side of the vehicle. We're going to hook those and we're going to tip the rack forward. And then our next step is we got to remove this access panel right here that's going to give us access to the bus bar. So first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to kind of remove the seal away. So just pick it up and just kind of pull it out of your way. It just sits in a channel here. And then using a T25 Torx, we're going to remove the 4 fasteners to remove this panel from the vehicle. And I'll show you how to get that panel off. Okay, once all the fasteners are removed, the T25 Torx, we're going to need to remove this front cover. So it's going to take a little strength to pull it up, but there's locking tabs up here that go underneath the headlight pod. So we're actually going to grab the front of this and we're just going to give it a quick thrust upwards and just kind of pull it up, and then we're going to work it right out. So you'll notice there's actually 6 latches here. Those are locking into these 6 square slots here on the upper fender assembly. So I went ahead and removed the battery bungee cord and the cover from the battery. So I'm just going to go ahead and disconnect the ground cable first. We always want to make sure we always disconnect the battery negative first, because if failure to do this will result in a high current electrical arc and may result in the battery explosion. So always disconnect the ground cable first, then the positive cable. So we'll go ahead and disconnect that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to remove the nuts from the bus bar here on the red cables and the black cables. And what we're doing here is we're just preparing the bus bar to accept the winch cable wiring. So we're just going to remove these and we're going to retain the nuts. We're not going to throw them out. So we're going to keep those. So what we're going to do here next is we're going to remove the front bumper cover. The bumper cover is held on by 4 T27 Torx screws. And once we get those removed, this front bumper cover will just come right off the vehicle. We want to make sure we retain these screws when we go to reinstall the bumper cover. And with the last bumper or with the last bolt removed, the bumper cover will come right off the vehicle. So next we're going to remove the winch cover from the lower front bumper cover. If you plan to use a plow, remove the winch cover from the lower front bumper cover and do not reinstall. If you do not plan to use a plow on your vehicle, cut out the center section that is shown in your instructions and reinstall the winch cover on the lower front bumper cover if you desire, but it's not required. So we're going to go ahead and remove this cover. So there's just 2 push darts here. We just need to remove. We'll get our dart puller here. And once those 2 darts are removed, that cover gets removed. And now the front bumper cover is ready to be installed on the vehicle once the winch is installed for it to accept the winch. So we're going to go ahead and install the winch into the vehicle. So just to point out, there are 4 fastener spots on the vehicle. 1 here, here, and then 2 on the other side of the vehicle, which are going to go into the holes on the winch bracket. And we're going to be using the bolts that have the locking agent on the threads already, and we're going to be using a 13 millimeter 3/8 drive socket. So when we put this winch in, we want to make sure the wiring gets kind of passed to the right side of the vehicle. And when the winch goes in, it kind of has to come in at an angle to tip in and get it past. It's a little bit of a technique to get it in, but it does fit. And then once it gets in the position, we just want to ensure none of our wiring is pinched. And we want to make sure this is routed up kind of around the radiator at this time. And then we'll go ahead and install our fasteners and torque them down the specification. So as an added note before you install the winch, if you're kind of coming up on a service due or you're at the mileage or hours recommendation in your service manual or owner's manual, Now would be a really good time to actually change the gear case fluid, because now you can access the fill hole on the side of the gear case and then drain the fluid out. With the winch installed, it makes it a little difficult to get in here. It's still somewhat possible, but it can be challenging. So next we're going to go ahead and route the red and the black power cables going to the winch. We're going to route these up to the bus bar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the wires between the frame and the cooling fan of the vehicle. So right in this area here, we're going to pass those wires up through to the bus bar. So now with the wires ran up from the winch contactor, we're going to go ahead and connect the red to the red post, or where all the other red wires are coming off of, which is this one right here. And just an added note, you'll see on these connectors, these crimp connections, they kind of got a little bend to them. We want to put it on this way. So I'm just going to put that on the post, and then the negative, the black cable, I'm going to do the same thing. And if these don't stay on there, you could take the nuts and just thread them on a few turns just to hold them in place. We're going to leave them like this right now because we have more wiring that has to be hooked up. So we'll continue on. So our next step here is we're going to start making some connections on our wiring in the kit for the control box. So I'm going to talk a little bit about first on the vehicle. So this connector here is a green and black wire. That's coming off the winch contactor. The wire here with the four black wires coming out of it, this is going to the fair lead in the front of the vehicle. On the control box itself, there's going to be 4 wires coming off, or 4 groups of wires. 2 sets of green and blacks, and then a black and a orange, and a set of blacks. So on the other end here, there's a splitter that I installed, and I'll walk through where all these wires are going. So let's start with this longer wire that's just the black, double black wires on the control box. The double black wires are going to plug into the double black wires coming out of the fair lead. On this vehicle, there'll be 4 wires going into this connector from the fair lead. That's normal, that's okay. I'm going to connect that. Then we have some more connections here. We got the green and black. The green and black are going to connect to the green and black coming off the winch contactor. And then on our splitter here, one of these splitters here, this end with the black and green, is going to go to the vehicle harness connection that the vehicle is pre-wired for, and we'll show you that here in a second. And this other green and black is going to go for our wireless receiver that we'll show you how to install that here shortly. And the remaining wires here, the orange and the black wire with the ring terminal, are going to be routed up to the bus bar for our electrical connections. So on the vehicle, typically on the left side of the vehicle on the frame, you're going to find this white connector with a black and green wire going to it. That's going to be pre-wired in the vehicle's main chassis harness. And then this was the Y splitter that we just installed that has the green and the black wire. Those are going to be connected. So we'll go ahead and get those connected up. And what we're going to do is, once we get all this bundled up, we're going to route this up the left side of the vehicle following the same path we just took with the red and black cable wires that would come off the winch contactor. So we're going to go ahead and hook up the wireless remote receiver. So the preferred location is going to be right in this area here. There's a cross member bar located right here, and we'll just use some zip ties that are supplied with the kit to secure it to the frame. On this wireless control box here, receiver, we're actually going to connect the wiring. There is a green and black connector here, and that's going to connect up to our last green and black connector on that splitter. So we'll go ahead and get that connected. And then we're going to get this into position like this, and we're going to go ahead and run our zip ties in here and secure it to the frame. And the remaining wiring here, this is going to be routed down the right side of the vehicle, and it's going to follow the same path as the wiring we took with the black and red cables going to the winch contactor, and the black and the orange wires we actually are running up to the bus bar for the control box. So everything's going to be taking the same path, and then we'll come back and clean everything up with zip ties. So what we're going to do next here is we're going to go ahead and make our electrical connections. So the set of wires here that I have in my hands, this is from the control box and from the wireless receiver. So the black wires with the blue ring terminal on there, they're going to go to our ground stud on our bus bar down here. And then the two spade connections on the orange wires, they need to actually plug into a couple connectors that are on the vehicle. So you have to get yourself a little utility knife and just kind of cut away the electrical tape there. And we want to get those two wires loose. And you'll notice those wires are orange with a white tracer. The orange with the white tracer is going to be key on battery power. So we're going to go ahead and connect those up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to route it underneath the coolant line here just to make it look nice and neat. I'll plug one in. And then we'll do the same process with the other orange wire to the other connector. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and connect our black wires up to our ring terminal. So I'm going to come back underneath the coolant line for it's routed nice and neat. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that black cable that I installed, and I want to sandwich these smaller connectors on there first, like that, and then reinstall that. And what we're going to do is we're going to install our nut that we had previously removed. So we'll go ahead and cook up the last red cable here. And that's the one going down to our winch contactor. And then we'll reinstall our nut back on there. Get it started with our fingers, and then we'll come back with our 10mm 1/4" drive ratchet. And we will torque this down. Again, we do not want to over tighten these. Again, just as a reminder, our battery is disconnected, so we have nothing to worry about here. There's no power going to the vehicle at this time. And then that should be good. And we're going to come back and we're going to clean up all the wiring under here, and then the wiring down on the right side of the vehicle where we made all our electrical connections. So we're going ahead and just kind of finishing up the wire routing here. So kind of getting rid of the last few zip ties here, getting it nice and tight. Just want to make sure when you're done routing all the wiring, you just do it once through, making sure that it's not rubbing on anything, any sharp edges, or wrapped around anything that's going to possibly rotate, or if it's in the fan too. You don't want it to be stuck in the fan. So we'll go ahead and add a couple more zip ties down here near the fan for the harness, and then that should actually be pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and install the handlebar switch here. So the handlebar switch comes in two pieces, and it only goes together one way. It can't be reversed. So just keep that in mind when you're installing it onto the handlebars near the left-hand control. So what we're going to do is we're going to feed the electrical connection between the two connectors going to the left-hand control. An added note here, there is a slot cut in to the switch molding here on the plastic. You want to make sure your wires are routed into that little notch. That way they don't get pinched when this comes together. So we'll go ahead and feed that wiring through. And then we'll go ahead and slide that into place. And then we'll slide our cover onto the back in place. And then just as an added note, there's a little tab that comes off the switch here that has to be above the engine off, run off button, the red button here. And then we'll go ahead and tighten this down. And these are held together by two T25 torque screws. So we'll go ahead and install one of those. And again, we're just going into plastic here, so we don't want to over tighten it. Just need to snug it up. That one's snug. Come back to the other one and just verify that it's in place. It is. So we got our wiring that's routed through here. Now what we're looking for is the other end that it's going to plug into. It's typically going to be zip tied to the handlebar, It could be a potential, it could be underneath the headlight pod, but typically they're zip tied on the outside. So we want to remove the dust cover that's on here. So I'm just using a small little pick. Push down to release the dust cap. And then we're going to go ahead and connect up the wiring. And then we'll come back here and we'll just install a zip tie on here to secure everything to the handlebar. So we're going to go ahead and reinstall the cover back in place on the vehicle. So we're just going to lift up the rubber seal here and we're going to slide that back into place. It is kind of a tight fit, so let's get it kind of in the position. And it drops down, and then around the cab here, you're going to have to lock those tabs in. If you just kind of put your hand down here and just give it some firm pressure, it'll press in. And then we'll go ahead and reinstall the 4 torque screws we took out. They were the T25s. And again, we're just going in the plastic, so we just want to snug those up. So we'll go ahead and reinstall our seal back in the track. Once that's all installed, it looks good, we can go ahead and shut the front rack, and we can go ahead and relatch everything back down. So we're going to go ahead and reinstall the front bumper cover back onto the vehicle using the 4 T40 torque screws we removed earlier. We're just going to go ahead and put that through the front grille, put that in place, and we'll go ahead and install our T40 screws, and we'll go ahead and torque those down the specifications. So we're going to go ahead and reattach the battery cables. I already got them started on here, so I'm just going to tighten them down. So I went ahead and installed the plastic cover on top of the battery, and then I went ahead and installed the bungee cord around the battery, and everything's fastened and tight. So we're going to go ahead and check the function of the winch now. So we're going to push the out button on the remote. We're going to go ahead and hold down the in button and make sure that the winch stops once the rubber bumper reaches the fairlead. And it does. We're going to go ahead and test the handlebar switch also. I'm going to push the out button and the in button, and it works properly. So we got the wireless remote here, and the wireless remote gets mounted. The recommended location is going to be mounted on the handlebar pod here in this location. The holster has 2 holes in it, and included in the kit are 2 T27 Torx. You're just going to drill an 1/8" pilot hole and then screw these into the headlight pod or the handlebar pod. This is the recommended location. You don't have to mount it there, but you do want to make sure before drilling the holes that you do inspect the back side of this pod, making sure you're not going to run your drill bit into any wires. So this concludes the installation of the Pro HD 3,500-pound winch with rapid rope technology on this Sportsman 570. For additional information on Polaris accessories or winches, please visit polaris.com/winches or your local dealer.